She was a widow carrying more than just the weight of grief. She was carrying the last living piece of a man the law had marked, and the outlaws still wanted to claim. No family, no safe name, no road that didn't lead back to danger. But when 3 riders came looking for blood and gold, what stood? Between her and a noose wasn't a gun. It was a man who said nothing and still did everything. What he left at her door would change everything. Luciana sat across from a man she hoped never to see again. Her hands folded over the swell of her stomach. She didn't tremble. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and unwavering. Then I'll die a widow, not a traitor. Across the cracked saloon table, the man's eyes narrowed. His name was Malric Sloane, and he had once ridden beside her husband through fire and lawlessness. Now, with her husband buried in a shallow canyon grave, Malric had claimed what remained of the gang. The saloon was nearly abandoned, the few remaining drinkers too drunk or too frightened to look up. A single oil lamp cast shadows across Malric's scarred face, the gleam of the revolver on his hip flashing every time he twitched. "Don't think that baby in your belly will make me spare you, Luciana," he warned, leaning closer, the scent of tequila and something worse rolling off his breath. She had known this moment would come. She just hadn't expected it so soon. Ever since Jace had been shot in that botched robbery outside Red Valley, Luciana had stayed low, playing the role of the grieving widow. But she knew Jace had stashed the gang's final haul: gold, bills, untraceable bonds, somewhere only he and perhaps one other would ever know. And everyone in that gang had seen the way he looked at her, the way he trusted her. Malric was certain Luciana knew. "You were his wife," he hissed, tapping the pistol's handle. "You know where it is." She stared back, unmoved. "Even if I did, I wouldn't give it." To the man who let him bleed out while he begged for help. The insult landed sharp. Malric shoved the table with a snarl. It screeched across the floor, drawing a startled glance from the bartender, but no words. No one dared interfere. Luciana rose slowly, her back straight despite the pressure on her spine, the weight she carried. She had long since learned to walk with strength to mask pain and fear alike. You couldn't be married to a man like Jace and not know how to survive among monsters. But there was a time when she believed Jace was different, a man trying to carve out something good. In a bad world, that belief had died with him. Now all that remained was the child growing inside her, and the knowledge that every man like Malric wanted something she could no longer afford to give. Obedience, silence, surrender. "You won't shoot me here," she told him plainly. "Not with the sheriff 2 doors down and a saloon full of ears. You came to scare me, not to kill me." His sneer said she was right. "Not tonight," he muttered, turning on his heel. "But you won't get far. You're heavy, alone, and there's not a soul from here to the Sangres who doesn't know your face." She didn't watch him leave. Only when the door swung shut behind him did she allow her fingers to tremble. The bartender said nothing, just slid her a half-full glass of water and a slow nod. She left both untouched. Her mind was already elsewhere, calculating what she could carry, how fast she could move, who might help her if she knocked at their door in the middle of the night. The answer was no one. Jace had burned bridges, and she had stood too close to the flames for too long. Still, she had no choice. That night, long after the saloon went quiet, Luciana slipped out the back carrying nothing but a small satchel. Inside, a worn photograph, a silver locket, a tightly rolled bundle of bills, ones she had stolen not from the gang, but from the lining of Jace's old coat. She had nothing else, no plan, no map, only the need to get away before Malric returned with fewer words and more bullets. Outside, the moon was sharp and cold against the desert brush. The wind tugged at her shawl as if warning her back inside, but she pressed forward. Behind the stables, she found the mule she had paid a stable boy to keep quiet about. She mounted slowly, breathing through the ache in her hips and the twist of nerves in her chest. The child inside her shifted, as if sensing the danger. She whispered, "Hold on, little one. We're not dying here." And then she was off, hooves kicking dust into the silence of midnight, heart pounding in time with the mule's steady trot. Every mile away from that town was a victory, earned not in comfort but in defiance. She didn't dare look back. Nothing behind her was worth seeing again. As dawn began to thin the darkness on the horizon, Luciana pressed on, exhausted, but determined. She didn't know where she was headed, only what she was leaving behind. Her past was full of shadows, a husband she couldn't fully trust, a gang that never saw her as anything but an asset, and a world that punished women for surviving. But in front of her there was at least the chance of something different. Not safety, perhaps, but possibility. And that was enough. Her breath came shorter, the pain in her lower back intensifying. She kept going. Each breath she took was a decision. Each step the mule took was a refusal to die in a world that wanted her buried. And so she rode, pregnant, hunted, but not defeated, and with nothing but a bundle of worn letters, a mule, with no name, and a heartbeat inside her that mattered more than gold. Luciana disappeared into the night, fleeing the man who had tried to corner her with fear. She left behind the saloon where she had been threatened, the face of the man who would not stop chasing her, and the weight of a past she could no longer afford to carry. The only thing she held on to was her will to survive. Nothing more, nothing less. Luciana didn't remember falling. One moment she was gripping the reins, her fingers raw from holding too tight, her thoughts scattered like dry leaves in a storm. The next, the ground was beneath her cheek, hot and unmoving. Her vision had narrowed hours earlier, first into a haze, then a tunnel. Her lips cracked from thirst, her lower back screamed, and her legs trembled with every jolt of the mule beneath her. She had pushed herself far beyond the limits she thought she had, because stopping meant being caught, and being caught meant her baby might never be born. But the body doesn't ask permission when it gives out. It just quits, and hers did silently, violently, dropping her to the dirt in the middle of nowhere. The mule, half-starved and confused, stood beside her, huffing, waiting, but she didn't stir. Her last thought was the sound of her heartbeat drowning in her ears and the whispered plea, "Just let him live, even if I don't." When she woke, it was to stillness, not the kind that threatened, but the kind that held. A low ceiling stretched above her, rough and hand-built. The walls around her were dry timber, weather-worn but solid. Her head throbbed. Her mouth felt like sand, but she was covered, a thick wool blanket wrapped tight around her. And when she turned her head, she saw her boots lined beside the cot, cleaned and stitched. Her satchel sat untouched. For a heartbeat, she panicked, hand snapping to her belly. Then she felt it, a firm kick beneath her. Palm. He was still there, still fighting. Her eyes stung, not from pain this time, but something else. She tried to sit and noticed a tin cup just within reach. Water, still warm. She drank half of it in seconds. The taste wasn't just clean, it was mercy. The man appeared at the open doorway, his back to her. Broad-shouldered, still as stone, coat faded with years of use, hat low over his face. He didn't turn. He didn't speak until she made a sound, her throat clearing, weak but steady. Only then did he face her. He was older, his beard streaked with gray, a scar just visible beneath his left ear. His eyes weren't soft, but they weren't cruel either. Just tired, watchful. "You're awake," he said simply. She tried to ask where she was, but her voice cracked. He walked in, crouched near the hearth, and poured more water from a kettle she hadn't noticed before. "You passed out near my North Trail. Your mule was near dead. Figured I'd bring you in." She stared, unsure. "You didn't ask who I was." He shook his head. Didn't seem polite. Something in his calm unsettled her more than any threat could. "Why help me?" she asked. He met her eyes for the first time. "Didn't need to know." "Your name. Just knew I wasn't leaving a pregnant woman to rot in the dust." He didn't press her with questions, didn't ask where she'd come from, who she was running from, or what sins she might have packed in that satchel. Instead, he pointed once to the table. "There's bread and jerky. Eat what you can. I'll be back before sunup." And then, like that, he turned to go. She should have called him back, should have demanded answers, demanded to know why a stranger would give without asking. But all she said was, "Wait, what's your name?" He paused, then answered over his shoulder, "Elias." "Boone?" And then he disappeared into the last colors of dusk. She stayed there, in the silence, clutching the cup he had left her like it was made of gold, not because of what was in it, but because he had handed it over without looking at her like prey, without trying to take something in return. She glanced to the stool next to her and froze. Her knife was there, not hidden, not taken, placed, within reach. That detail broke something in her, not in a way that hurt, but in a way that forced her to confront how long it had been since someone had seen her as human. Everyone before Elias had wanted something: obedience, flesh, secrets, silence. But here was a man who had offered her warmth, water, and a weapon. No strings, no pressure. For the first time in months, maybe years, Luciana felt something she almost didn't recognize: safety. She didn't trust it yet, but she wanted to, and that was a start. She rested her hand on her belly, felt the life move beneath her skin, and whispered, "Maybe, just maybe." Elias Boone didn't return until morning, but she didn't run. She could have. Her knife was there. Her boots were mended, and the desert was still waiting. But she stayed. She ate the jerky. She drank the rest of the water. When he came back, he didn't speak right away, just tipped his hat, hung it by the door, and started mending a broken stirrup in silence. Luciana watched him, quietly, not moving, not speaking either. But something between them had shifted, and not in words, but in weight. She wasn't sure what this place was, or who exactly this man was underneath the scar and quiet hands, but she no longer saw him as a stranger. He hadn't tried to claim her, hadn't forced a single question. And in a world where every man she'd ever known had come with demands, Elias Boone had offered something far more dangerous: gentleness without agenda, and that made her want to stay long enough to find out why. Luciana didn't choose to stay with Elias Boone because he asked her to. He never did. He offered no promises, no conditions, no explanations. But after that first night, when he gave her warmth, a blanket, clean water, and placed her knife within reach without a word, something inside her loosened. She awoke the next morning to the scent of bread and firewood, and instead of preparing to run, she stood and swept the floor of the bunkhouse. No one told her to. No one stopped her. Over the next days, she found her hands drawn to work she hadn't done in years, collecting eggs from the hens behind the barn, cutting vegetables alongside Clara, the older woman who cooked for the hands, and eventually helping mend worn shirts with uneven stitches. No one asked what she was doing there. Elias watched from a distance but never interfered. In his quiet, steady way, he let her belong. The silence between them became a kind of understanding, one that didn't rely on questions or backstories. Each morning, Luciana woke a little earlier. Her body ached under the weight of her pregnancy, but it didn't feel like punishment anymore. She moved slowly but with purpose. Elias said very little, but when he did speak, he always looked her in the eye. Never around her, never through her. That mattered more than she admitted. One morning, after feeding the hens, she returned to the porch and found something waiting for her. A chair. Simple, wooden, with a thick leather cushion and a gently slanted back. She stood in front of it for a full minute before sitting. The seat took pressure off her hips and lower spine immediately, and a sigh escaped her lips without permission. From the window, she saw Elias at the fence line, tightening barbed wire. He didn't look her way, didn't wait for thanks. That evening, when she passed him in the barn, she stopped. "You made that chair?" He nodded. "Seemed like you needed it." She hesitated, then smiled, a small, quiet smile that felt unfamiliar on her face. "It's perfect." Elias only nodded again. "Good." It was the first time in months she laughed, just a little, but it was real. As the days passed, her hum returned. Low, tuneless melodies as she worked. She wasn't healed, not entirely. The shadows hadn't lifted, but the weight felt shareable now. Even Clara began calling her sunshine when the mornings came brighter. The place had a rhythm, and for the first time since Jace died, Luciana was in step with it. But peace, she had learned, was not permanent. It could be interrupted by a single voice. That afternoon, she was hanging laundry, her fingers raw from the clothespins, when she heard boots behind her. Heavy, slow, dragging. She turned, and the blood in her chest froze. A ranch hand, younger, new, face partly hidden under a dust-stained hat, stood watching her. His eyes lingered too long. His smile was too sure. "Took me a minute," he said. "But I knew it was you." Luciana stayed still. "You must be mistaken," she replied. "No," he said, pulling off his glove, wiping dust from his mouth. "Luciana West. Alive. Pregnant. That'll make certain people real eager to know where you've been hiding." Her hand dropped to her belly without thinking. "I don't know what you're talking about." He grinned wider. "Sure you don't. Sleep tight tonight." He walked away like a man who had all the time in the world. Luciana didn't move. Her legs felt like they'd turned to iron. Her heart beat so loud she could hear it in her teeth. She had no proof of who he was, no idea how long he'd been watching. But she knew. One thing. He knew her. And if he knew, it meant others could find out. That evening, she couldn't eat. She sat on the porch in the chair Elias had built, wrapped in the blanket Clara had folded for her the night before. The night air was cool, but she couldn't stop sweating. Her fingers kept returning to her stomach, over and over again, as if shielding the life inside her with nothing but skin and fear. When Elias stepped onto the porch, his boots creaking the way they always did, she looked up at him with panic in her eyes. "I think one of your men is going to get me killed," she said. Her voice didn't break. It shattered. Elias didn't ask who, he didn't ask why, he didn't say a word at first. He looked toward the bunkhouse, his expression unreadable, jaw tightening slightly. Then he nodded once, and he walked down the steps into the dark. Luciana stayed in the chair, her heart racing, not knowing what he would do, but knowing, without a doubt, that he would do something. That knowledge was terrifying and reassuring in equal measure. She didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every gust of wind made her sit up straighter, clutching her belly. But she didn't run. That was the difference now. Fear had come back, but so had someone who wouldn't let it swallow her alone. And that meant she had something to lose. For the first time since fleeing the gang, Luciana truly understood what that meant. And it made her afraid in a different way, afraid of how much. She had come to need this silence, this man, this life. The sun was just past its peak when they arrived. 3 riders, dressed in dark coats and wide-brimmed hats, came slow up the path to the ranch as if they owned the ground beneath their horses. Luciana was in the kitchen helping Clara peel potatoes when she noticed them through the window. Her gut twisted. Something about the way they rode, too relaxed, too deliberate, set her on edge. She dropped the knife and moved to the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. The tallest man dismounted first. He moved with the ease of someone used to intimidating others. His boots kicked up a thin trail of dust as he approached the porch. Elias stood on the top step, arms crossed, jaw tight, waiting. He didn't speak, didn't flinch. The rider tipped his hat slightly, more mock than respect. "We heard this land might be for sale," the man said, voice smooth but laced with threat. Elias didn't answer. Right away, he stared the man down, calm but firm. "You heard wrong," he said finally. His voice was low, solid as timber. "Everyone's got a price, Mr. Boone," the rider insisted. Elias didn't blink. Not everyone. The other 2 men exchanged glances. One of them, shorter, wiry, with a snake's grin, spat a thick stream of tobacco near the porch. "Big house for a man living alone. Real nice porch, too." His eyes slid past Elias toward the window. Luciana stepped back instinctively. The 3rd rider, older and grizzled, gave a slow nod and turned his horse. "We'll be around, Boone. Things change." The 3 turned their horses and rode off slowly, the way vultures circle before they land. But the damage was done. Luciana could feel it. These weren't men who gave up. They were hunters, and now they had caught scent. Inside the barn, a hand named Tobias had watched the exchange from the shadows. As the dust settled, he slipped into the main house and found Luciana still frozen near the window. He spoke low, barely above a whisper. "I know that one. The short one. Used to run with bounty crews out of Santa Fe. Worked jobs with the Cortez crew. Worked with your husband." Her breath caught. The blood in her face drained. It was confirmation. This wasn't a coincidence. They had come for her. Elias didn't say a word when Tobias told him. He just turned and walked out the back door, his stride purposeful. That night, the ranch grew quiet, not peaceful, tense, heavy. Clara locked the doors early. The hands spoke in hushed tones. Luciana sat in the chair Elias had made for her, her hands on her belly, trying to calm the storm building in her chest. But Elias didn't come home. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock, then 2. The winds shifted and the air thickened with the kind of pressure that comes before something breaks. She didn't sleep, just sat on that porch wrapped in an old blanket, staring into the dark, waiting for movement. Just before dawn, she heard hooves. She rushed to the edge of the steps. Elias was riding back, slow, upright. His coat was torn, as a dark stain trailing down one sleeve. He dismounted with a wince, favoring his right leg. But he was alert, his eyes sharp. The revolver on his hip was holstered and clean. "It's not my blood," he said before she could ask. She stared at the dried streak across his arm. "What did you do?" She whispered. He looked past her toward the edge of the horizon. "I made something clear." That was all he said. Miles away, at a forgotten station tucked near the canyon's edge, 3 horses wandered freely, saddles stripped, reins cut. Inside the shack, 3 men lay groaning on the floor, one with a broken wrist, another missing teeth. The third, their leader, bore no visible wounds, just humiliation. And nailed into the tree outside their camp was a strip of rawhide, blackened by fire. Carved into it with crude but deliberate strokes were the words, "The woman here is protected. Return and blood will follow." It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration, a message written not just to them, but to anyone thinking of coming after her. Back at the ranch, Elias said nothing more. Luciana watched him, feeling something deeper than relief. It wasn't pride or fear. It was something raw. Someone had finally chosen her safety over their own peace. She didn't know what to say. She followed him into the house. He didn't ask for thanks, didn't explain. He simply removed his coat, hung it on the same peg as always, and poured himself a glass of water. The quiet between them had changed. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with what had just been done, and what it meant. Luciana sat back in the chair he had built, feeling the weight of her child pressing against her ribs. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to breathe. Elias had drawn a line, not with speeches, not with laws, but with action. And in the world she came from, that kind of vow meant more than any ring. That night, she slept with her hands folded over her belly, the message etched in her mind as clearly as if it had been carved in her bones. The woman here is protected. Return, and blood will follow. It was late morning when the past came knocking. The sound of hooves and boots on dry ground didn't raise alarm at first, not on a ranch accustomed to supply runs and visitors. But something in Clara's voice as she called for Elias made Luciana step onto the porch with her heart already racing. The man dismounting was unfamiliar, dressed in a wrinkled coat with a crooked badge pinned to his chest. He looked out of place, too polished for the land, too official for the dust. He carried a folded document and the authority of someone who'd signed too many warrants and asked too few questions. "I'm looking for a woman by the name of Luciana West," he said, unfolding the yellowed paper. "There's a warrant out, aiding and abetting a known outlaw, evading lawful arrest, wanted alive, considered dangerous." The world beneath Luciana tilted. Her pulse thundered as she instinctively placed both hands on her belly, as if she could shield the child from the law the same way she had from bullets. Clara stepped forward. "You must be mistaken. There's no one here by that name." The man opened his mouth to press the point, but was cut off by Elias. His voice rang out steady and sharp. "There!" All eyes turned to him as he walked down the steps. Unhurried, every movement deliberate. "She's my wife," he said. "That child she carries is mine." The words fell like a stone into still water. The deputy blinked, caught off guard. "And you are?" Elias didn't flinch. "Elias Boone, owner of this land. Husband to Luciana Boone. This is my family." His tone didn't rise, but it didn't need to. It was final, undeniable. The officer hesitated. That changes jurisdiction. But if this is a lie, Elias took a step forward, towering now. Then question me in front of a judge, in town. Not here. The silence that followed was long enough to hear the creak of leather and shifting dust. Finally, the officer nodded once. I'll report it. He mounted his horse and rode off, the warrant forgotten for now. Luciana stood frozen, her back rigid, her throat tight. She hadn't asked Elias to say any of that, hadn't expected it, but as he turned back toward her, there was no pride in his face, only resolve. Later that day, he took her to town. The courthouse was nearly empty, manned by a clerk, a sleepy deputy, and a judge whose robes had seen better days. Elias spoke plainly. He gave names, dates, intentions. She's not a criminal, he said. She's carrying the future. That should be protected. The judge listened, silent. When he finally stamped the papers, the sound echoed like thunder. It was done. Luciana Boone. On paper now, not just in Elias's voice. But that moment didn't define anything for her. It wasn't until the ride home, when the dust trailed quietly behind their horses, that something shifted inside her. They hadn't spoken for miles. Then Elias pulled his horse to a stop, reached into his coat, and handed her a soft bundle tied with leather. It's not a ring, he said, and it's not a promise. She untied the leather cord and unfolded the cloth. It was a scarf, hand-stitched, imperfect, but careful. Her new surname was embroidered in blue, Boone. Her throat tightened. He looked at her, steady as ever. I can't protect you from what they think you were, but I can protect you here if you choose to stay. She held the scarf like it was something sacred, not because of the name, but because of what it represented. It wasn't a vow made in front of a priest or a deal whispered in a back room. It was a choice, a name not given, but offered. She wrapped it around her hair slowly, her fingers trembling. Then she looked up at him. I didn't ask you to save me. He nodded. You didn't have to. The space between them didn't close, but it didn't need to. The weight of everything she'd survived, every lie, every betrayal, every man who'd tried to take something from her, it all felt lighter. Because Elias Boone had asked for nothing, and still he had given her everything that mattered. Luciana didn't feel claimed. She felt seen, not owned, but chosen. The scarf didn't bind her. It freed her. She wore it not because it was safer, but because it was honest. She had chosen that name not out of desperation, but because, for the first time in her life, it was hers to choose. When they returned to the ranch, the light had begun to fade across the field. Elias lit the lantern in the window, as he always did. But now, it didn't feel like a signal of where she could hide. It felt like a beacon of where she belonged. That night, as the wind passed softly through the eaves, Luciana folded the papers Elias had brought from town and tucked them away in her satchel. Not to hide, but to keep. Not because she had to, but because, finally, she wanted to. Luciana's labor began just after midnight, not with panic or cries, but with a tightening in her belly that pulled her from sleep like a warning whispered by something older than fear. She said nothing at first, just sat up, breathing through the first wave, steadying herself on the edge of the bed. The next one came quicker, sharper. She woke Clara, who took one look at her face and nodded with the quiet urgency of someone who had seen this moment many times, but never dismissed its weight. Clara rolled up her sleeves and got to work, filling the room with the quiet strength of an elder who knew what needed doing and didn't waste breath on comfort she couldn't promise. Luciana's body trembled, her skin damp with sweat. The pain was relentless, unmerciful. She gritted her teeth, gripping the wood of the bed frame, knowing this pain was the threshold. Not a curse, but a crossing. Outside, Elias paced the porch. He didn't speak, didn't knock, didn't ask for news. His boots moved back and forth across the boards in a slow, constant rhythm. He hadn't left since Clara told him it was time. He just stayed, a silent sentry, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the door. That separated him from the two souls that mattered most. Inside, Luciana felt like her body had been split open by something more ancient than pain. Clara's voice guided her through it. "He's almost here, girl. One more. Breathe." The room tilted. Her breath caught, and then a cry broke free. High and wild. Not hers, but his. Her son. Her boy. Clara lifted him gently, wrapped him in a towel, and handed him over. "Strong lungs," she whispered, and louder than thunder. Luciana cradled him against her chest, tears spilling freely. "He's alive," she said. "He's here." She didn't call for Elias. She didn't need to. When she looked toward the doorway, no figure waited. No man burst in demanding to see. But something had been placed just past the threshold. A wooden horse, hand-carved, imperfect and beautiful. Etched into its base in steady strokes was a name. Benjamin Boone. Her breath caught. She reached for it, holding it to her chest like something sacred. Every inch of it spoke of time, care, intention. Elias hadn't asked to be in the room. He hadn't tried to force his presence into a moment that belonged to her and the child. Instead, he had left a symbol, not of possession, of welcome. She held both the baby and the horse, her heart full in a way she hadn't known was possible. Clara stepped back, allowing the silence to stretch, letting Luciana live in the moment without interruption, without instruction. Weeks passed. The air grew cooler, and the ranch shifted into, autumn. Luciana healed slowly but purposefully. Each day she grew stronger, not just in body, but in spirit. She carried Benjamin against her chest as she walked into town, a basket of books swinging at her side. The old schoolhouse, long abandoned, came alive under her care. Chalk dust danced. Through sunbeams again. Children's laughter spilled through the windows. She never called herself a teacher, but the children did. Some in town looked twice when she passed. Some whispered, but no one dared speak their doubts aloud. Not when Elias greeted her every evening with the porch light, already glowing. Not when her son smiled so freely at the world. Safety, she learned, wasn't a promise given by others. It was built, with time, with effort, with choice. Elias never changed his rhythm. He worked the land, he mended saddles, he carved another toy horse, smaller, for Benjamin to chew on. He didn't ask for declarations. He didn't speak of marriage or labels, and Luciana never needed him to. At night, she sat by the window while her son slept, and wrote in the leather-bound journal she kept hidden beneath the floorboard, not out of shame, but to protect it from weather. Time and eyes that didn't understand. Her hand moved across the page slowly, deliberately, forming words that mattered. "I do not carry his name because of promises. I carry it because it was the first name I ever chose when I finally chose myself." She paused. Let the ink dry, closed the book, and stood. She walked quietly down the hallway, past her son's crib where Benjamin lay dreaming, one hand curled around the edge of the wooden horse Elias had carved. In the next room, the porch lamp burned softly as always, and Elias sat where he always sat, watching the night not as a threat, but as something that could finally be trusted. Luciana didn't speak. She didn't need to. She sat beside him, rested her head against his shoulder, and in that silence found a peace that didn't need to be earned or defended, only lived. She had survived the fire, the chase, the loss, and now she had arrived at something rarer, stillness. And in that stillness she was no longer running, she was home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Souls of the Old West. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and send this video to someone who needs to hear a story about strength, redemption, and the quiet kind of love that endures. Thanks for riding with us. We'll see you in the next tale.